Speaking of invasion, turns out we're being absolutely exploited and rinsed. Now, this is not news for any of us who have documented over the last few years the record annual influx of hostile foreign dependents and criminals into the country, but I like to keep us up to date on all of the stats just so we can understand the scale of exploitation. If you want people who aren't going to exploit you and keep bringing you the news, obviously you can subscribe to this website for as little as £5 a month because we're not monetized on YouTube and that's how we keep the lights on. But also, this is the last week of merch ahead of our American election stream that will be going from about midnight on the 5th to about 8 a.m. UK time on the 6th. We'll watch if there's any fortification, or hopefully we'll be cheering in a Trump victory. And you can also watch along with posters, mugs, hats, and t-shirts, which are only on sale for a limited time. So you can go and check that out on our website, uk.shop.lotuseaters.com. Now, we go to the first foreign criminal, because there's been a lot that's been kept in this country over the last few days. There's an Indian paedophile who can now stay in the UK because he says that being deported would harm his family.
Don't care about his family. He's hurting other people's families being here.
Yeah, unfortunately, he's going to stay and we're going to have to pay for him.
This has happened before. I forget if it was a Syrian refugee, someone from the Middle East who was also a paedophile, where he was granted asylum in this country after being convicted because it was said that he would be in danger of being executed by the authorities if we sent him back to where he came from.
There's another one a few
Why is
weeks
this
ago.
our problem? Why is that a bad thing?
I think he had abused his stepdaughter and he had been prevented from being deported because he didn't want to upset the family.
To upset the family.
Work that one out. Okay, but this is a convicted Indian paedophile, and he won his appeal to remain in the UK, despite the Home Office themselves trying to deport him. The man, who can only be identified as HS, because we're protecting his identity for some reason, was jailed for 14 months in 2021 for 3 counts related to child sex abuse images. Bear in mind, jailed 14 months for 3 counts of possession of child exploitation material, and he served out his sentence before we even contemplated deporting him. So we've paid for him to stay in there. So that in mind as well. He's also given a sexual harm prevention order and required to sign the sex offenders register for 10 years. Yet we still don't know his name.
Oh, that'll show him.
Yep. A report from Lawrence Chester, an independent social worker, concluded the deportation would be too harsh on the man's children. Lawrence Chester, you're a traitor, and in a just society, you would also be tried for keeping these dangerous criminals in here. But there you go. The paedophile claimed deportation would damage his right to a private and family life under Article 8 of the European Convention on Human Rights. So you can ruin another family's life, but yours gets protected at the expense of the British taxpayer. Great.
Well, they break out the colour swab to determine the sentence first.
Yeah, so his lawyers successfully argued his defence in court, despite judges previously preventing the man from having, quote, direct, unsupervised contact with his own children. The current contact is reportedly limited to video calls. The case is now pending further appeals by the Home Office.
Right, okay, so he's not allowed to see his own children outside of video calls. So actually, surely getting rid of him, if you weren't going to deport the family as well, would actually be a benefit to the family if he's that much of a danger to them.
It would also, if he's allowed contact with his children via video call, not affect whether or not he could see them, because he can't see them in person, so he doesn't need to be in the country. But that's a spurious argument. He shouldn't have been here in the first place, and he still shouldn't have been here.
Well, yeah, the only conclusion that I can draw from all of this information that you presented is that they actively want him in this country.
Yeah, here's another one. Portuguese guy now as well. Drug dealer, multiple offender, will stay in Britain because deporting him would upset his mother. His mother who raised this criminal. This is Fabio Indai. He also used Article 8 of the ECHR to argue that if he was forcibly removed from Britain, it would harm his mother's mental health.
Surely him being a drug dealer should have been upsetting to his mother.
Clearly not, 'cause she raised him. So this is just obviously sort of aspiring career path she wanted to set him on. In 2021, Indai was sent to prison for 4 years and 2 months for intent to supply Class A drugs after police caught him with more than £1,000 of cocaine, MDMA and ketamine. Now the Portuguese are cutting in on the Albanians' turf, it seems. Before this, several years earlier in 2012...
Everyone's dealing cocaine in England except for the English.
I know, they're taking our jobs. In 2012, he'd served 18 months in jail for robbery. Why is he here? He's a serial offending delinquent, and yet has to stay in the country, presumably at my expense. There's some also updated costs for illegal migrants, just so we can put that in perspective. So Rupert Lowe is one of the Reform MPs. He's actually doing really good work because he's treating his time in Parliament as, right, now that I've access to all these records and this research team, I'll get to the bottom of it and just keep publishing this data.
That's actually really useful work, so thank you.
Yeah, Rupert Lowe's great. He said, I've been questioning the Home Office about their estimates, even rough, of the true illegal migrant population in the UK. Because bear in mind, we were told by Oxford University it's 750,000. But then Pew Research in 2017 said it's about 800,000 to 1.2 million. And we know 140,000 have been recorded crossing the channel since 2018. So it's probably in the 1.5 to 2 million range.
And then if we start to go off of actual practical records of the kind of infrastructure that we've got, then the infrastructure seems to suggest that we have millions and millions and millions of people who shouldn't be here, judging by things like mobile phone usage and contracts and sewage.
Yeah, well, funnily enough, the Home Office aren't looking at any of that because the response, he says, is that they have no idea. They haven't even produced an estimate, or they have and they won't be willing to provide it to an MP.
I wouldn't be shocked if the sorts of jobs worths that occupy the bureaucratic infrastructure of this country legitimately just haven't thought to do it.
There are multiple stats that they do collect, but they then don't release. I remember Patrick Christis' team from GB News once asked, I think it was about the nationality of foreign offenders, and they said, it's going to be too expensive to put the information together even though we've got it. And he said, right, what we'll do is then, we will foot the bill entirely for this FOI, and they said, nope, still don't want it. So they've got the data, they just don't want to give it to us. Always remember that. It's always a choice to inflict these foreign criminals and their costs on you. We do know that there now has passed the 2023 total of small boat crossings already this year. So Labour line must go up. The number of migrants who crossed the channel in small boats in 2024 has now surpassed 2023's total for the year. On Friday, the 25th of October, 424 migrants were recorded crossing the channel to bring 2024's total up to 29,578 compared to the 29,437 total migrants in 2023. The total in 2023 was also 36% down on the record of 45,774 arrivals in 2022. They don't have a graph in here, which is pathetic, but they usually do. In October, they also saw more arrivals of migrants in small boats than any other month in 2024, with 4,334 people and 77 boats. Now, we're not just focusing on illegal migration, because legal migration is higher. There are more criminals coming in. About 50 to 60% of people on skilled worker visas are net dependents, and they're also bringing as many net dependents in, so legal migration matters, but I'm just bringing you the numbers on illegal because that also matters too. And the reason it matters is because Labour are now opening more asylum hotels.
Yeah, I actually saw some of this yesterday when I was looking through for my segment. On the Manchester Evening News, there was a few hotels being opened around the Trafford area, and also the Bibby Stockholm barge is being emptied at the moment so that the migrants in it can be dispersed around the country.
Yeah, this is Operation Scatter, thanks to Angela Rayner, who said that every single county in the UK will get their, quote, equitable share.
Their fair share, which makes it seem like the government knows that it's not a good thing, because it sounds almost like they're putting a burden on these people. But the government, of course, diversity being our strength, would never think that. Yeah,
they're just going to enforce demographic communism on us instead. There's some stats in here again, which are quite interesting, because I love a good stat about how we're being taken for all we're worth. They're going to open more asylum hotels because the demand for families has soared as nearly 150,000 migrants have crossed over the last 6 years. As of June, 30,000 migrants were situated in over 250 hotels, costing the taxpayer $4.2 million a day. There's an interactive chart in here, which is quite useful as well. So these are the numbers, the average number of people per boat, and yeah, 2024 it's going up. So it looks like it might even break the 2022 record, because if they know that they're not going to be prosecuted for this, if they know that smashing the gangs doesn't amount to anything, it just means playing whack-a-mole while also still allowing people to make asylum claims and letting them get through, then this industry is going to keep on ticking because there's a profit margin there. So no sign of stopping. Of course, the Home Office, knowing this looks bad, declined to comment on October the 15th and refused to give up-to-date figures on how many asylum seekers are in hotels. So they would know that, but also they don't want to give the number. The latest official data showed that at the end of June, the total stood at 29,585, just nearly 30,000 men milling about in town centres on our expense. Since then, over 14,000 migrants have arrived across the Channel, most of whom will be housed in hotels, suggesting the current total is more than 40,000. At its peak, there were over 56,000 migrants in hotels at the end of September last year, costing the taxpayer £8 million a day. Bear in mind, that total number for 2023 was £14.4 billion. We have apparently a £22 billion black hole in the budget, according to the OBR. So about 2/3 of that could be resolved tomorrow by deporting all of these foreign criminals who presumably we know exactly who and where they are because we spent money on them.
And now are spending money dispersing them. Of course, the government would excuse why they couldn't do that by saying that even if we wanted to do that, which they don't, even if they wanted to do that, then there would be such an enormous upfront one-time cost to deporting them, getting the planes, getting the boats, sorting out the transport for them to get out of the country, that it would mean that it's not a good financial decision.
I was told this by a Reform candidate, actually, on Twitter over the weekend, that we can't do mass deportations because it's too expensive, and it's too logistically impossible to deport that many millions of people. Bear in mind, each airport in the UK services about 10 to 30 million people every year, so that would be sort of like, what, 10% slither, maybe, if that?
I like the argument is essentially, well, we can't take the limb off, so you're going to have to bleed out instead.
Yeah, and we could also just give a large contract to an airliner that was willing to do this. It's not like they've got to fly out in luxury or anything. And I would be willing to pay a one-off fee to do this within a year or two to stop paying nearly 15 billion quid every single year.
Well, yeah, of course, because obviously the fallacy of the argument is that overall costs are going to well exceed over the years however much a single one-off payment would actually add up to.
Exactly.
It's a ridiculous excuse. That's what it is. It's
just about Will. And we can tell this about Will because a Home Office source then told The Times, quote, "When we entered government and even before, during access talks, we were told that the previous government had been drawing up plans to open scores of new asylum hotels. This was because the number of migrants crossing the Channel has increased by 18% in the first half of the year, and they had not been processing any new claims." A Home Office spokesperson said, "The government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with thousands stuck in the backlog without their claims processed. We have taken immediate action to restart asylum processing," not deportations, asylum processing, "which will save an estimated £7 billion for the taxpayer over the next 10 years, and are delivering major uplift in returns to remove people with no right to be in the UK." Right, 7 billion quid. Remember that figure. Apparently, we're going to save 7 billion quid. But we're not, though, because we know from a parliamentary debate that I covered on my show Tomlinson Talks, which is why you should be watching that, on the 10th of September, the Conservative MP Nick Timothy ran the numbers on this, right? And Nick Timothy has done a Twitter thread here with the clip, and he says that Yvette Cooper's claim that it would save 7 billion quid, according to the Home Office, is also false, according to the Home Office. Because he wrote to them and asked, and said, how much is this actually going to cost and what are the details of this? And they said, well, what's going to happen is illegal migrants are going to be removed from the foreign aid budget because they're going to have the right to claim welfare. So what they're going to do is they're going to hide the annual cost because you don't have to report it if it's in the welfare budget, but you do if it's in the foreign aid budget. Because
so scummy.
It's disgusting.
That's so sleazy and scummy, moving them from one spreadsheet to another because the other spreadsheet you don't have to report the cost of them.
So whether or not they're actual legitimate asylum seekers...
We're run by shysters.
Yeah, we are being...
Jobs worth shysters.
Rinsed for all we're worth by foreign criminals. And whether or not they have legitimate asylum claims, the virtue of being in the UK, according to both the proposed constitutional changes by Gordon Brown and this plan by the Home Office, will allow them to claim, quote, welfare, housing, legal, pensions, health costs, and more. So you might be entitled to get a pension if you're a legal migrant in the UK. Right, okay, brilliant.
Okay. I don't want to sound like Peter Hitchens here, but if you are a young man, even if you are overwhelmed with patriotic fervour, what reason do you have to stay unless you are wanting to go down with the ship?
I actually want to do a show at some point that calculates why you should even bother working as a Zoomer. Like how much gets taken in tax.
What's the point? I've seen a load of people pointing out that if you obviously this would be a very high earner. This would put you in the top bracket of earners in the UK. If you earn £99,000 and then you're about to get a pay bump that gets you to £100,000 per year, you might as well not take it because the amount of tax that's going to be taken off will make you worse off. I've seen some of the calculations where some people earning £70,000 per year get, in terms of the tax and national insurance taken, £20,000 stolen from the government. And then if you look at it from the employer's perspective, they're paying £78,000 because before even that money even gets to their employer, they're getting £8 or so grand taken off it.
Yep. You are being rinsed so that these people who have broken into your country can stay in fancy hotels and get the full spectrum of welfare benefits because GDP go up because every year state spending accounts for GDP.
Without my tax money, how are they going to afford their Adidas?
Quite. He also notes in here that the impact assessment from the Home Office, where this says that they've saved 7 billion quid, assumes that not a single migrant would have been deported under the duty to remove either to Rwanda or their home country, and instead will remain in the UK in publicly funded accommodation for 10 years. So we know that that's impossible to save 7 billion, because if the number keeps going up and they don't deport anyone, and they can claim more welfare benefits, then of course the cost is going to go up. So this means their solution to deal with the asylum backlog is not to deport people, it is to give blanket amnesty to 70%. So they're going to grant asylum citizenship to 70% of people, and because they can claim welfare, this is not going to save 7 billion, this is going to add, when 44,137 migrants due to be deported will get asylum, will add £17.8 billion. That's on top of the 14.4 billion. So that's going to come to about 32 billion quid. So that's the cost of this, right? That's the cost. We also have more.
Will that all be included in this budget black hole, or will they ignore that cost?
That eclipses the budget black hole, so you actually wouldn't even need to make any bloody spending cuts in the first place.
How much is the black hole?
22.
So that's about 10 billion more.
Funny that. Again, the purpose of the system is what it does, and the system is robbing you blind. We also have some more data. Nigel Farage has said that he's found this from his own parliamentary investigations. Every illegal migrant crossing the Channel now costs the taxpayer £41,000 each. That's an increase of 140% since 2019. I've seen Ben Habib suggest that it's 50,000 from different modelling. Reminder as well, legal migration, every single low-wage legal migrant, which is now the majority, costs 150,000 if they came over at 25 and retire at 66. If they live until the average age, which is 83, I think it's £465,000, and it's well over £600,000 if they live past.
Well, at this rate, if they come here today at age 25, they're not going to be here when they're 65 because the country will have collapsed far before then.
Yeah. It's now the majority of the foreign aid budget, by the way, and Rupert Lowe then did some more investigation into the costs of the welfare stuff, and he went, okay, well, what about the NHS? Because we keep hearing about the NHS budget doesn't go up, but we need migrants to fund the NHS. But with the population rising, it never keeps pace with funding, so it's just this vicious circle. Well, hang on a minute. How much are migrants costing the NHS? And so we looked into it. And so what's meant to happen is the Department of Health are meant to charge foreign users of the NHS, but they don't charge them before they use it. They try and chase them after they use it. So you can come over, you can use the NHS, and then as lots of people have, they just return to their home country and never pay the bill. So how much money do they lose when doing that? Because they're meant to pay 150% of the going rate as a surcharge. And he had a response from the Department of Health that said, in 2022 to 2023, the aggregate income identified lost was £100 million. Cash payments received that year, 32 million. The year before, 67 million with 25 million recovered. For 2020 to 2021, 61 million with 21 million paid. So they're losing between 40 to 65, 68 million pounds every year on foreigners just coming over and using an NHS. Funnily enough, like Kemi Badenoch's parents did. So that's great. That's going to keep happening to us. You could simply just refuse the access to the NHS unless they showed valid insurance that they can then claim it back on. But of course, that would be not free and racist and discrimination, I'm sure. Rupert Lowe also investigated the Department of Work and Pensions for how much they're spending on interpreters. Because that's important, because as we know from the recent grooming gangs trial where 7 were prosecuted in Rotherham and the victim was blocked from giving her statement recommending they be deported because they're Pakistani nationals, some of them needed an interpreter despite being in the UK for that long and abusing young girls. And he found that the Department for Work and Pensions has admitted that interpretation costs have soared from £2,219,613 in 2019 to 2020, pre-massive migration wave, to £6,195,053 in 2023 to 2024. And he said, well, why the sudden boom? Could be all those foreign nurses that committed qualifications fraud, or could be, again, cases like this, where a man, just a man...
What was his name? They did include his name in this GB News.
Kulvinder Ram.
Typical British man, yes.
Yeah, he allegedly attacked 2 children, aged 2 and 8, and a woman who tried to defend them at a house in Dagenham. And he appeared at Barkingside Magistrates Court, assisted by a Punjabi interpreter. So, painting a picture for you. People will break into the country. You have to pay for their hotel. They're also going to get given asylum. And so they can claim housing, dental, medical, even possibly pensions, and that's going to add an extra 17 billion to the budget at the time where there's meant to be a 22 billion black hole, and they've cut the winter fuel allowance to make up for that. Anytime they commit a crime, you've then got to pay for their legal defence. You've got to pay for the lawyers that then complicate the process where they're going to be deported, and so you keep paying for them to stay here. You're going to pay for their jail sentence as well, and you're also going to pay for their interpreter when they can't even understand the charges being put forward to them because they've been in this country and haven't bothered to learn the bloody language. So just to let you know, we are paying millions to battery farm foreign criminals, and there's going to be no end in sight.
I hope you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, and if you want to see what else we're up to, you can follow Bo's series, Epochs. This time he's talking about Pompey and Caesar. I love the ancient history stuff. And if you want to see all the other things that we're putting out, you can always follow us on Twitter, where we post links. Thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.